waiting for, and the one reason you came up to Manchester. So I hope you enjoy it. The question we'll be asking this afternoon will be: is dissolving to Sorry, I'm going to pick this up so I can't see it from there. Is devolving to mid-sized cities the future for economic growth? In the current climate of devolution, there's been much discussion about what should be devolved and where, but a question mark still hangs over how to have both economic growth and public service transformation. This discussion will focus on the potential of mid-sized cities to act as the missing multipliers in this equation. Key cities have unique strengths and vital growth sectors that are positively contributing to UK PLC. They're helping to rebalance the national economy. With a combined GVA of £163 billion and a population just shy of 8 million, key cities make up 11% of the economy and are currently growing at a faster rate in terms of GVA than large cities. As the leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council, a key city, I've been heavily involved in the West of England's devolution bid. This is an ambitious offer to government focused on substantial growth in economic productivity and utilises the unique strengths of the key city, Bath, working alongside neighbouring authorities, North Somerset, South Gloucester and Bristol. This event will explore the best ways to roll out national devolution plans to mid-sized cities such as ours, whilst at the same time acknowledging and accommodating their inherently different needs. These needs will vary from area to area in terms of ask and government options. Undoubtedly the most controversial issue at the moment with government is the Metro Mayor. Some places are quite keen, some aren't. Now I'm hoping we'll discuss that during this discussion. We in the key cities welcome the openness of government to listen to varying offers from both different areas. And I especially look forward to realising the ambitions of Bath and North East Somerset through the West of England devolution bid. And finally, we all appreciate that for the key cities to form the missing multipliers, then challenges will need to be met, and we relish that opportunity. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Greg Clark. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. The first thing I have to do is to say a big thank you to Philip and ResPublica for a consistent championing of this agenda. Starting from a time when it was not as fashionable as it is at the moment, shall we say. There weren't many of us that in the days when you started, which was what, 5-6 years ago?
Yes.
5 or 6 years ago, the Treasury took a rather critical view of the arguments for decentralising power and budgets to anywhere, big cities, small cities, counties and towns. But what a lot has changed in that space of 5 years. You hardly, I don't think you'll find any meetings on the fringe here arguing that we should have a centralisation, that these places, key cities, big cities, small towns and counties have got too much power, we need to take it back, this was all a mistake. And I think the fact that the political weather has changed, I say we don't have the meetings here, I don't know, perhaps there was some in Brighton last week. That's I think unfortunately the leadership of the Labour Party, the national leadership, I don't think is on the same page, to my regret, because we get on very well with many of the local leaders. But I think it has been a transformation. It's a thrill, particularly at this conference, to have the announcements that we've had from the Chancellor yesterday, something that Philip and ResPublica have long argued for, which was the retention of business rates by local authorities. So I'm grateful that you've been here from the start, urging us on, and I'm sure you'll urge us to go further and faster, and that's absolutely essential. I think it's particularly appropriate that we're talking about key cities. There's never the right terminology, as we know. Lots of the key cities are not cities, including my friend John's town of Bournemouth. And in fact, I come from what is one of the key cities as part of the group, is a medium-sized town. In fact, if you reflect on the name of Middlesbrough, where I'm from, it probably encapsulates it perfectly. A middle-sized town. That's what the name implies. And I can tell you, as someone growing up there, the idea that just because we may not be as big or as famous as Newcastle, say, or Leeds, doesn't mean to say that the sense of local identity and local possibility was any the less. Quite the opposite. And in fact, there was, I think, sometimes a double resentment during the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, that not only did we seem to be a long way from London, where a lot of decisions were taken, we were also quite a long way from Newcastle, where other decisions were taken. So one of the pleasures for me has been to see the revival of the ambition and sense of civic leadership in the mid-sized towns and cities across the country, which this group is testament to. What are the particular opportunities and challenges for the medium-sized towns and cities? Well, I think it's a good moment to be discussing it, because all across the world the interest is on networks of towns and cities rather than single great monolithic metropolises, if I can put it that way. And it's been fascinating to me, having come back just last week from China, where I was with the Chancellor and the delegation of northern leaders that went there. One of the things that the Chinese were very keen to discuss with us is how the vision of taking towns and cities that are already there, that have a history and that are developing, but linking them together so that they can be part of a network, reinforcing each other with complementary industries, complementary skills, complementary cultural attractions, and seeing movement between them. The Chinese regard as being a major plank of their program of development, and is absolutely what Key Cities has been talking about, and the approach that we've been taking to the Northern Powerhouse and such like. So the work that's been done over recent months and years by Key Cities is I think striking a chord with thinking right across the world, and it's great to be part of that conversation. And you might think this is an inevitable way to think about towns and cities, or linking them together. But in many ways, the medieval origin of our thinking about cities was rather the reverse. When you had city-states and there was the rivalry between neighbours, which sometimes still exists, at least these days doesn't result usually in erecting great walls and fortifications and private armies to keep each other out. So the Northern Powerhouse, I think, is very different from the medieval predecessors. Florence and Siena and Pisa are not the models, at least in their fortifications, perhaps in their flourishing culture and commerce. But the connections between places are particularly important, and I know that's one of the things that we will discuss. What else to reflect on? And obviously, if you recognise that one of the purposes of devolving power from the centre, that's to say, not doing things in a uniform way across the country, because if you do things in an identical way to every place, then it's almost bound to be wrong in every place, because every place is different. So I think you do need to reflect that difference. And so when it comes to devolution, I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Different cities will want to devolve, have powers devolved to them in different ways. Different counties will, and different key cities will, different mid-size cities will. So, for example, in recent discussions, Doncaster and Barnsley, which I would dare say would qualify as part of the thinking of this group, are part of the Sheffield City Region deal that was concluded and announced last week. I mentioned Middlesbrough, the Tees Valley, the Teesside authorities have been working together with a proposal for a combined authority and a devolution negotiation for themselves, not linking or not joining Newcastle and Gateshead and Sunderland in their discussions, or Leeds and the Yorkshire authorities to the south. So those key cities doing that in a different way, and I'm sure, as John is going to go on to talk about in the south, what's being proposed in Bournemouth and Dorset, very different still. So I think there isn't a single model of organisation for towns and cities that are as diverse as the membership of this group and its potential membership. What are the challenges then that I think the negotiations that we're having and open to having with each place need to address? I think there is a question of size and scale. Because if you're to do what we're keen to do, which is to take powers from ministers in Whitehall, say transport powers, from the Transport Secretary, then it obviously makes sense that you have to have a body big enough, strategic enough, widely encompassing enough to be a sensible holder of those powers. And so I think that will involve, and does involve, people, neighbours coming together to be of a scale that is appropriate to be able to be in receipt of those powers. And a lot of the discussions have been taking place around that. I think the second, which also relates to geography, is to consider what is what do you think of as the travel to work area. In the jargon, it's often described as the functional economic geography area. What is the true area that coheres as an economic force? Because if you're devolving powers, say, over skills and training, again, you want to do it into an area that seems to describe well enough the local economy and that businesses can come together and recognise. I think, for the most part, the LEPs have described such a geography, and it's been one of the big advantages of local enterprise partnerships over the old regional approach. And then, just as the one size doesn't fit all, there clearly is the capacity for different levels of ambition, different levels of leadership, different levels of innovation. There will always be leaders that want to push the boundaries, want to test things, want to be the first movers and to reap all of the advantages of that. There will similarly be places that might be a bit more cautious and want to see how some of the leaders fare, learn the lessons from that, draw some confidence from it, and proceed. We've seen this with the big cities, Greater Manchester forging ahead, followed by some of the other big cities, and then now right across the country. And so I think the capacity for change and innovation and leadership will vary from place to place. I know that John and I have been having discussions over quite a long period now, and I know that in Bournemouth we've had a council and certainly a leader that absolutely displays that ambition, and we want to back that, and we want to give voice to that because it gives examples that other places can follow. But it's not for everyone, and I think one of the restrictions on the pace of decentralisation, in fact more than that, one of the things that's held decentralisation back from really having started is the fact that people, I think in the centre, expected to devolve in a uniform way, and then noted that particular places didn't seem to be ready and up for the challenges of that, and said, well, we can't give powers to people and councils and authorities that don't want them, and that's, I think, led everyone to progress at a very slow pace of the people at the back. Through the city deals and the growth deals, I think we broke out of that, and I think it is reasonable to take an approach that we will do deals with those that are ready, and those that are following will not be written out of the script. They will have their chance to follow on. So it's a very exciting agenda I think that we have in front of us. It's a great thrill for me, having taken the city's portfolio, I think through, it'd be a gross exaggeration to say through almost every department of government, but it's certainly been...
it's close though, isn't it?
It's been all across Whitehall, but that's because I have always felt that you need to drive the progress, you need to push the momentum, you need to get recruits and adherents to the cause. And in that, we've been greatly assisted by Philip and ResPublica. So it is a pleasure to be here at a great moment for localism in one of the think tanks that's been most closely associated with it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Secretary of State. I'm Andy Bounds. I work for the Financial Times newspaper, so I've been covering a lot of this agenda, partly because I'm based in the north, so the northern powerhouse, but equally getting interested in devolution and how it's working out across the entire country. So I'm here to learn a lot today as well. So we've got a brilliant panel to help us do that. Philip Blond needs no introduction. He's Executive Director of ResPublica. He is author of the report that you can take over with you this afternoon, and will start the discussion off for us. We've also got Bob Blackman, who's MP and a member of the CLG committee, and a former leader of Brent Council as well, so he's got experience both Westminster and locally. John Beasley, who Greg referred to, is the leader of Bournemouth Council and a hotelier. I'm very, very keen to hear when the Tories are next coming back to Bournemouth for annual conference. And I'm sure we'll be having words with you later. And on the right, we obviously Tim Warren, we heard from earlier, and then we have Andrew Carter, who's Deputy Chief Executive of Centre for Cities. Fair to say, I think lives, eats, breathes cities, and is very well positioned to talk about the economics and the implications of all this. So we'll start with Philip, and then we'll have time for a few questions once everybody's had their say. Now, one of Philip's ideas is this idea of having a yellow card and a red card for malfunctioning Whitehall centralised services. So that if people feel they're not doing their job, they could give them a yellow card and then a red card, and the local authority could perhaps take them over. So I thought I'd introduce that here
almost
today.
controversial.
And if everybody goes on too long, they'll get the yellow card, and then finally the red, and that will be done. So 4 minutes. Your 4 minutes starts now.
Oh, it'd be more like 40. But no. An enormous thank you to colleagues around the table, to the Key Cities Group. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with, and to my colleagues who've worked on the report. But the biggest thanks to Greg Clark. I think we've been friends since 2009, and I've been just wonderfully enthused by the fact that Greg hasn't given up on the city's portfolio and is driving it forward, and we have the most innovative and exciting discussions. And I'd like to put on record ResPublica's what's the right word? Celebration, I think, isn't too short of it. The Chancellor's announcement about rate retention and the ability to vary rates. The great concern from both key cities and core cities who we've worked with, and we're working with many cities on an individual basis, has been, for goodness sake, if you want us to be autonomous, give us the ability to raise our own funding, and you have. And I think enormous congratulations to Greg and to the Chancellor for this. I remember one very famous Labour leader who I won't name, but let's say he's leader of a Labour council, and I asked him what he wanted from the general election. He said a Labour victory with George Osborne to remain as Chancellor, and perhaps we could work Greg Clark in there as well. So I think what I love about this is the genuine embrace of a radical one nation offer, which I think is the way forward for the country. But to the work at large, what do we argue in here? Crucially, what we argue in here is that the benefits of devolution do not solely accrue to the already large. We argue actually the benefits of devolution, the benefits of agglomeration or concentration, also accrue in equal, and we would argue larger measure in some cases, to the small. You can concentrate if you're small, and you can concentrate if you're large. And actually, many of the key cities don't have the problems that the core cities have. Many of the core cities have essentially a working class that's been abandoned by globalization, and I would argue by 30 to 40 years of policy. They have enormous problems in terms of welfare to work, medical health, all the other indices of deprivation. Many key cities do not. Key cities often are extremely agile. They don't have the, if one can call it this, the long tail of an industrialization that we didn't and failed to speak to the needs of those people when globalization moved in another direction. And the point we've been trying to make, and I do feel this strongly, is that the arguments of size and scale also apply to key cities. One of the points that we flagged is actually many key cities are highly innovative, small, and they have contiguity, I managed to say that, not necessarily with those close to them, but with those far from them. I'm thinking of Derby with its automotive industry and Rolls-Royce, and Sunderland with Nissan. And actually the type of sectoral relationships that we argue are needed, and I remember the BIS report from just before the election, we know, and Sajid Javid also recognises this, that supply chains in the UK are under threat and need to be rebuilt in the case of automotive manufacture, or in the case of something like aerospace, are under threat. Key cities are crucial for this because many of our automotive R&D and production are located in these areas. And actually, the type of at-scale economic geography is non-contiguous. And part of what our argument to government is exactly this. And so the functional economic geography, paradoxically, of key cities could be with small cities that are very far away from each other, sometimes at different ends of the country. But what this means is, because supply chains nationally, it doesn't matter if you're 30 or 50 miles away or 100 miles away. If you're in the same country, the returns are pretty similar. That actually we have to think much more creatively about how key cities can function. And the evidence supports this. We know from European work that actually on a European level, the 20th century was marked by the growth of large cities. The 21st century is marked by the growth of small cities catching up and in some cases exceeding the growth rates of large cities. Now I suspect this is to do with the invention of the internet and the fact that face-to-face encounters don't need to take place in the same physical space. I think something also to do with the lowering of transaction costs in terms of cargo and transport, but it's also fundamentally to do with the fact that higher value returns can be communicated in a way in which low value returns can't. And many key cities are on the higher value chain. So what I would argue on behalf of key cities is actually it's a mistake to be solely constrained by the idea of geography and the idea of a contiguous economic footprint, because for key cities it's not. And if we care about Britain PLC, it's important to think of them sectorally and try and build those relationships there. So I think conceptually there is no good reason not to give as full a suite of powers to key cities as to core cities. That's my fundamental argument. And I think we have evidence on our side, both from global and from local studies. We also know in the UK that key cities have been growing at a faster rate than core cities since the recession. And if we did an analysis of where the advanced manufacturing or where the advanced high service economies were, they would be disproportionately located in the key rather than the core cities. So what I want to argue is actually let's not have the division that we've had between the powers that we would dispense to the large and the small. Because once you actually accept the reality of interconnection, which Greg I think has spoken very lucidly about, these distinctions of size no longer matter. And many of the type of economies we're talking about, if you draw hubs or hub and wheel and spoke models, can fit that economic footprint. And actually, I think the notion of footprints really needs to expand beyond the merely physical. I mean, in terms of our city-based work, I had a wonderful conversation last night with Jeremy Hunt, who I think revealed with us in conversation just the depth and complexity of his thinking. And I think it makes sense for cities to talk about health footprints as well as economic footprints as well as public sector footprints. And I do think the debate on key cities has been distorted somewhat by the core cities being the vanguard model. And what I think we need to assess is actually that footprints for key cities can take place at a distance. That's the fundamental point that I would argue. And that if we care about Britain, and I think we do, all of us, that I wouldn't like to see a certain sense in which smaller powers, less powers go to the small rather than the large. I don't think there's a defensible argument for that, given that the economic footprint, I'm repeating my argument, but sometimes you have to, on themselves, you can't make that mirroring point. Now, in advancing the ideas, and I just would point out that in our last interim report, we argued for rate variation and the return of domestic rates, which I was very pleased about. The thing that many cities, both core and key, face is the fact that many central services delivered by the central state are still woefully dysfunctional. We've talked about dysfunctional cities. Greg and I, way back when, I think we first talked about buy, bid, build. I argued for the right to challenge, which became a siloed provision, which was, I think, a bit of a disaster when I wanted to be a place-based provision. But I would like to give that right to challenge to local authorities, where they see that actually we've got massive failures on health or welfare to work or any of the other central services. If we feel the local authorities are competent, and we know that delivering services closer to the point of need has massive benefits, let those cities have powers to step in, and so we don't have one failing central service replaced by another. And that, I think, would give real agency and power and create a true bottom-up revolution that Greg has helped to foster. And I think that, coupled with the idea that there's, if I can sum it up like this, there's no such thing as the small, might be the point I want you to take away with. And if there's no such thing as the small, there is no argument for giving different gradations of powers to different cities. Let's give it to all, and let them use it differently. If we do this, devolution, in my view, can deliver a reformed state that will create a state that can work for those who rely upon it. It can also deliver on the deficit, but produce even larger returns that can be reinvested to create a 21st century state. That, I think, is the aim, and that's the goal. And I think key cities and core cities and all of our localities, including counties, let's create a devolution offer that's fit for all, and let's not make a division in terms of the type that can benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bob, briefly.
Yeah. Well, that's a good introduction. It's great to be here, and those of you that have been around conference for a long time may well recall the great conference we had in Bournemouth 1994. Not too many, I suspect. In those days, we used to debate motions, and I had the honour of proposing the motion on local government. The ideas that I put forward at the time weren't too popular in the hall. The removal of council tax capping, the devolution of powers back to local authorities, and so on. I could go through a list, but here we are, many years on, actually talking about precisely the sort of powers going back to local authorities. Now, I regard this as being a renewal of local democracy. The reality is, turnouts in local elections are poor, to put it mildly. They're low, and if you speak to most voters, they say it doesn't matter, because central government controls everything. They hold the purse strings, they hold the powers, and in reality, for those of us that have served in local government, we know that 85 to 90% of the decisions made by local government are irrelevant, because central government control everything, and local government acts as a delivery arm for central government. Now, this is a potential revolution for local government and an opportunity. But with an opportunity comes a risk. We have to remember how we got to where we are now in the first place. We had left-wing local authorities, particularly in London, but in other places as well, Liverpool, just down the road, and others, which were revolutionary in a different respect. And MPs were standing up in the House of Commons saying, you have to do something about this, Minister, and take the powers away from them. So we have to respect and understand that as we devolve power to local authorities, be they cities, be they regions, be they sometimes they'll take decisions we, as Conservatives, don't like. But I would argue now there's an opportunity to say, but actually those decisions matter to you as residents, to you as voters. So the political opportunity for us as a political party is to say, now we have the decision-making powers, now it really matters. You must elect Conservatives to run these powers and to use these powers for the greater effect of the local area. So it's a big, big opportunity. But there are risks. There are risks, and we should understand, and I know Greg will understand this, that as we go along this road, it will be a bumpy ride. There will be authorities that take those powers and do things we as Conservatives do not like. But we have to say, it's up to you at a local level to take the decisions to change that authority, to get the decisions made in the way that you would like. With the sort of devolution comes responsibility. I would also argue that it's no good just devolving, I know we're talking about cities, and it's no good just devolving to regions. And I well remember having been elected as the leader of a local authority, which was a rampant left-wing local authority at the time. We devolved power centrally to local housing boards. It was a revolution. Our tenants went, do you mean we can actually have some say over what happens? No, you're going to have control over what happens. We don't believe you. We put it to the test, and it was revolutionary, and it worked. We devolved power to officers and said, actually want you to get on with things and do things at the coalface. Really? But we defer upwards to get decisions. No, you don't anymore. You make decisions, you take the risks, and you take the rewards with success. There are penalties for failures. And I think this ride on devolution has to go in the same way. We have to be willing to take those risks. We have to be willing to accept that some areas will get it wrong. We have to understand that not everyone will come up with the same sort of ideas. That is why you have innovation. That is why we're Conservatives. That is why we believe that it's the right thing to do to devolve power to the lowest possible level, not just stopping at cities, but right down to neighbourhoods, to enable local people to have a direct say both in the services that are delivered, but also in the outcomes that are achieved. And that has to come in a range of powers. And the great thing I think we're going to have is a recipe across the country with a wide variety of different forms of devolution. And as this goes, people will be saying, actually, why haven't we got that power? We want it. And it's a tough job. I take my proverbial hat off to ministers that are willing to give up power to make this happen. But we all, as now as an MP, we have the challenge, of course, being to say, well, actually, we don't have control over this. The local authority has control over this. We can try and influence the local authority, but we don't control it. And I can tell you, there will be pressures, because as decisions are made that are not in keeping with what some people would like locally, they'll say to the MP, you've got to get something done about this. You've got to stop it. And the pressure will grow to actually say, central government, you've got to take powers back. And we have to have the courage and the fortitude to say, no, this was part and parcel of what we're aiming to do. Give power to people locally and make sure that they bear the responsibility. If you don't like what the local authority does, vote them out at the next election and take the opportunity that arises for real democracy happening at a local level. Thank you very much.
We'll now hear from John. I think Andrew's said that he'll forego his sort of 4 minutes and just answer questions, which is good of him. So, John.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I would like to speak briefly, I think, in three particular areas. The first one is around key cities, and as a member of the executive of key cities, just to set the picture a little bit more. The second is the journey that we've been on with government through the coalition and now into a Conservative government. And the third is just to show that diversity of what we could all use our imagination to achieve through devolution, the proposal that we're coming up with in South East Dorset. So to start, key cities, 26 key cities around the country, and seemingly, on the face of it, not a lot in common. But as Philip was saying, there is a lot in common, but not perhaps in the geography. And what I think we've achieved out of that, despite the political complexity, is a common purpose that we are all intent on delivering. And so, whilst the core cities, and most particularly the powerhouse of the north and everything to do with Manchester is very much in the news, what's happening in key cities, those 26 places, is perhaps of more interest because of its ability to be flexible, to have the agility to move quickly, and to deliver on the government's agenda in a diverse set of different ways. And I think this is all about rebalancing the economy, it's all about unlocking growth. And I would argue, and I'd argue strongly, that the key cities are in a much, much better position to do that and to do it more quickly than is going to prove the case elsewhere. And that's against a background whereby, on a broad measure, probably 3/4 of those key cities are Labour controlled, and only 1/4 of them are Conservative controlled. The interesting thing is that when we have a common purpose, and it is about unlocking growth, and it is about all the good things that can come out of it, that common purpose leads us down exactly the same path. And I think it's very foresighted of the government to realise what the potential in this country is, regardless of the political colour of those authorities. Because both in core cities and key cities, the overwhelming majority are Labour controlled. But if we're going to get the economy of this country working as hard as it needs to in the long term, and put in place the powers that are required locally to do that, then I think the government, by taking that much more strategic view, has done this country a huge service. And in saying that, the focus through CLG, and most particularly by the appointment of Greg as the Secretary of State, gives me enormous encouragement and enthusiasm to see this through. And I think your appointment, if I may say, Greg, has been one that is not only far-sighted by the Prime Minister, but one that is going to help us, working with us, to deliver this huge agenda.
Thank you.
Now, in terms of the journey that we've been on, and in terms of mapping that looking forward, I don't actually think that there is a very specific plan about how we get from where we were to wherever it is we're going to go. It is evolving, and I think actually that's one of its strengths. I think if it was rigid right the way through, it would be setting itself up either to fail or to get sunk in bureaucracy, and none of us want that to happen. And so we began, didn't we, with the establishment of local enterprise partnerships and pushing that agenda forward to city deals, to growth bids, growth deals which are now being delivered in a variety of different ways across a very broad geography. And again, there's a bit of a theme evolving through how that has come about. And the next part of that, of course, is the combined authorities and what suits those particular places, those particular areas of the country. And they may not be to the same boundaries as counties or indeed LEPs or in fact anything else. They will need to be fit for purpose for whatever it is that we're trying to deliver. And that flexibility being built in is another theme that I think is going to help make this process very much more one of strength and longevity than it would otherwise be. And so we then come to the devolution part of it. And we've seen the example of what happens in a large metropolitan area with Greater Manchester and the powerhouse of the north. Well, actually, I suspect around this room, we'd all like to see perhaps smaller powerhouses in the areas where we're involved, because we all believe, don't we, in our own local economy, in the potential that we've all got in terms of actually what we want to deliver, not just in terms of services, but in the long term for our local communities. Because coming right back to the very basics of this, it is about delivering for the people we serve. It isn't about having some huge game plan that is going to make us bigger and better and all the rest of it. It is about how we deliver for local people and how we establish that growth and indeed our future economically. And when you look at that, individually we'll be thinking what's best for our local communities in terms of a devolution deal. Now the Chancellor yesterday began to roll that out alongside the sort of agenda that key cities have had now for some time. That's a happy coincidence. I would be surprised if there weren't any influences in there in terms of the speed of progress and the focus of what has come to the top of his agenda. But it has, and this is a great opportunity, not just for us, but for local government and indeed for the country economically. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The vision is a very big, a very bold vision, but it's being put to us locally, and in some cases almost individually, to deliver on that vision. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing down in deepest Dorset on the south coast, because I do it not by way of saying it's the model, because it isn't for everybody, but by way of demonstrating how we need to think very carefully and specifically about how we're going to deliver on this agenda, and how our local circumstances, challenging as they may be, need to be on a much bigger canvas than we've ever been in the position of thinking about before. So Dorset, not a very big county, but a county that is diverse, a very large rural element to it, and a very concentrated part of it that is urban. And that's been an issue of tension, obviously in the LEP, because the LEP is the county boundary. And of course the other tension has always been the private sector and the public sector, and making that work as well. And although in terms of key cities, we fervently believe that that is the method of delivery, on our own, Bournemouth isn't really big enough. It doesn't have that critical mass. It's a relatively small unitary, and next to us is another relatively small unitary in a place called Poole. Across Dorset, this small county, we have 9 authorities. 9 authorities. Well, I don't think if we were designing this today we'd start with 9, would we? It seems to me that there is a model perhaps for 2, and that to have 2 unitaries, a county council and 6 district councils, is overkill of local government. It's not efficient, and it certainly doesn't help in terms of the delivery of services. So what we're putting together is an ambitious devolution bid to government, but at the same time looking at the structure of local government in the urban part of the county, and putting together something whereby we will have those 2 unitaries of Bournemouth and Poole, alongside 2 of the district councils, Christchurch and East Dorset, the urban part of Dorset, a population approaching 500,000 people, a local government spend approaching £1 billion a year. We think that that achieves critical mass. We think that our ambition around devolution, and indeed most importantly, our ambition around economic development and how we can build on the huge amount of investment we've got coming into the area at the moment, will deliver for local people the kind of place, the kind of prosperity and the long-term ambitions of many of our businesses over the next 25 to 30 years. And so essentially that will be what we're coming forward with. So quite ambitious that we want to restructure local government in our own patch at the same time. We might be able to do it without doing that, but it seems to me that we need to share the ambition of government. We need to think big in terms of how much we could achieve at the same time. And we need to have that focus on delivery, which we've now begun to evolve, and which will be coming to you, Greg, to talk about in some detail fairly soon. So I hope that helps, because that is one example, possibly almost at the opposite extreme of what's happening here in Manchester, but there are plenty of other models besides. And what we were hearing about just now, in fact by all 3 who've spoken before me, is that there will be variation in this. I doubt very much actually there'll be 2 models of devolution that really are the same as each other. And that is its strength. And we must put the extra time and effort in to make that a reality. Thank you all very much.
We're now going to have some questions. I don't know how long Greg's got.
I've got about 10 minutes.
Right, I'm going to
speaking somewhere else.
I'm going to abuse my chairmanship by asking the first one, and then we'll open up to the floor. I mean, I guess the key thing here is, this small big debate. Jim O'Neill's report, the RSA report said, if you take the 15 biggest metro areas, you work with them, that's when you move the dial of the British economy. And for all these wonderfully agile, fleet of foot, relatively well-off smaller cities that are out there, the sort of cost of you doing deals with them doesn't outweigh the benefit. So, is that true?
Listen, there are big advantages in doing deals and devolving powers to big metro areas, but as all the speakers have said, if you want to have the economy, to take that first, reaching its potential, and this is what one of the big themes of the last 5 years has been about. One of the big themes of the next few years. If you want to be achieving your maximum, then you need to consider all parts of the economy and all parts of the country. And so where you have potential in big cities and smaller towns, I think you can do both at the same time. And that's just on the economy. I mean, it would be wrong to regard this agenda as being entirely economic, because there is a big cultural and social aspect to it as well. To make every city and town in our country places that are attractive, that are vibrant, that are good places for people to either work or live, is a hugely important ambition, it seems to me, as well. And so, Jim, in his brilliant academic work, has drawn attention to the big returns that are available from the big city regions. But one of the great things of having Jim now a minister in the government, and those of you that have sent in bids will get a visit from Jim and me and our colleagues over the next few months. We're working together to do those deals, but also the expressions of interest, the proposals have come from beyond the core cities, and I think it's absolutely right, and it follows the pattern, I would say finally, of the city deals, where we started with the city deals. There were at LGA conferences in the intervening period, there were council leaders from non-big cities who chased me down corridors, sometimes literally, saying, we can do good things too, let us have a go. And so we expanded that into growth deals, and I think they were a big success, and lots of colleagues in the country will now be seeing the benefits of those growth deals with money that was in the centre, now building infrastructure, skills, right across the country, from Cornwall to Cumbria to Northumberland. So I think you can do both at the same time, and it's great that Jim and I are working to do precisely that.
Okay, thank you very much. So, questions from the room. Lady at the back there was first with her hand up.
Thank you. Hannah David, Planning Futures think tank. I just wanted to ask, how do we ensure, and will there be any measures in the devolution bill, that wider strategic, regional and indeed the spatial picture is not missed by devolution down?
We'll take you together. Yeah, fine. Okay. Yeah. Any others? Chap at the front here.
Mark Cousins from Eye to Eye Life Foundation. From welfare to work and skills and social inclusion perspectives, so I'm not really familiar with this domain very much, but I just wanted it occurred to me, how does the devolution movement have an implication on the European question, relationships with Europe? I'm thinking of European social investment, structural funds, and relationships between them. Bodies, LEPs have had issues with Europe. What are the implications there?
Okay, fine. And chap at the back.
Andrew Brough from London Assembly. How do we address the problem that we have, because we have one regional authority already in England, in Greater London, the incredible mismatch that there is between the travel to work area for Greater London Authority and its current footprint. And there is a huge accountability issue here when so many people are dependent upon their transport on the GLA, and yet have absolutely no vote in determining that the future of that transport.
Okay, that's probably enough to be going on with first.
So on the, Hannah asked about whether there are spatial considerations in the bill. Actually, the bill going through Parliament is an enabling bill. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't say this has to be in, this has to be out. It's confined to this template, and I think that is right, because as has been evident through certainly the panel's sort of contribution so far, there isn't a single template. So it basically empowers ministers to negotiate and conduct deals with local authorities to transfer powers. That then needs to be ratified through an order in Parliament to be scrutinised at that point. So it's not prescriptive. But what we see coming forward from the proposals is often a coming together of economic development and spatial planning. So in Greater Manchester, for example, one of the parts of the agreement is that there will be planning across the combined authority, but actually with safeguards so that the individual authorities can't be, as it were, sort of dictated to, that it should be done through consensus. Different ways will do that different places will do that in different ways. But I think one of the advantages of having a coherent geographical area is and an organisation to match, which previously didn't exist in some of these places. Then you can do that more easily. So I think that will be important. When it comes to to European funds, I mean, first of all, on welfare to work, I mean, a lot of the big opportunities, it seems to me, in devolution are on public sector reform beyond what has been the core so far, which has been economic development. One of the things I think anyone in local public service will know is that you know your people, you know your communities much more intimately, much better often than it's possible for national agencies to know, and that means that degree of precision and tailoring and knowledge of what works can make a great advantage, not least in the outcomes for people who benefit from that help. So that would be a big part of it. Specifically on the European structural funds, our ambition, my ambition, is to have the combined authorities as the bodies that are responsible for the structural funds. They need to be agreed with the Commission, and that has proved frustrating in the past. So we reached a decision point earlier in this year where did we continue to have a standoff with the Commission, who weren't very keen on the local enterprise partnerships taking responsibility for them. What we said was, well, we will sign up to the programme, we will give LEPs great influence on these, but we regard it as unfinished business and come back to, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, Andrew's point on the wider travel to work area, this clearly somewhere as successful as London, people are vested in London who don't necessarily live in London. That'll always be the case, and it's the case in all of our areas. I think there are arrangements, certainly in some of the advantages in the north, for example, where the Northern Rail franchise, you're going to have the authorities right across the north helping re-let that franchise, and the connections with transport for the north being created that reflects those joint interests, I think are going to be there. Again, I think different places will have different solutions, but I think what is being done in the north is a good way of addressing a set of transport issues that go beyond one particular authority.
I'd like to hear from one council leader on this. I don't know if one of you's got particularly strong views, certainly on the spatial planning aspect, given that you span rural and urban areas.
Yeah, quite happy to comment on that. I mean, we way back when we did the core strategy, which I think was probably 2 years ago or last year, which seems about 100 years ago, and it seemed 200 years in the making. And I think we all aged 300 years doing it, if I'm honest. But we signed what we did. Yeah, absolutely. We have a duty to cooperate. So we actually already do share the spatial planning with the local authorities. You know, Bristol, for instance, have to provide 80,000 houses, and if they can't do them, then we have to take their unmet demand. So that's split between ourselves and the local authorities, the neighbouring authorities rather. But I think it also gives us the opportunity, if they're, rather than making these towns a little bit bigger, if you all decide, actually, why don't we have another village, another small town somewhere, it just gives you opportunity to do that. So I think it's actually, can be quite helpful, though it does cause issues, can be quite helpful.
Can I just ask Greg on the fundamental...
That's a good moment to leave, or a bad moment to leave. That's what's going on.
Greg, you know, key cities are marked by the perception that they will get less powers because of their relatively smaller size. The thrust of this report is that really the evidence doesn't back that distinction. I just wondered what your reaction to that was.
Well, as I said, there's no barrier to, there's no automatic size threshold. In all of these cases where we've negotiated deals, what we've said to places is you make a case to the government, you make an argument. In a sense, my advice, I've kind of coached the cities, towns and counties that have put bids forward in the past to help them make an offer to the government that it can't refuse. It's so evidently in the interests of the nation as well as the locality that it is compelling. So there is, I have no prejudice against it if you can demonstrate that some of the advantages of scale, which are undoubted if you're devolving powers, it's helpful to have a certain amount of scale. If there are countervailing advantages, and that's not particularly necessary for those types, for the types of powers that are being devolved, then we're open to consider that. It's one of the, I think, advantages of doing it this way. In the past, and when we started this, authorities were very keen to find out. You used to say to me, Greg, you just tell us what the government wants us to do, and then we'll propose it, and you can agree it, and that'll be fine. We'll agree it all. But I never did, and I refused to do so because actually I really did want them to think about how they wanted to do things locally. Because there was no point doing this, no point believing in this if you didn't think that there was ingenuity and local knowledge that could be brought to bear. And so that applies to the key cities as much as to the core cities and to the counties. You work a proposition that is convincing, and we'll be convinced.
Well, we're deeply reassured by that, that there is no size bar, and it's really dependent on the case made. I think that's wonderful.
As long as there's an elected mayor.
That's a whole different aspect, which might take me beyond my next fringe. Will you excuse me, folks?
Thank you very much. Can we ask for Andrew's insights?
Yes.
Because I think they'll be compelling.
He's on the hook now.
Well, I think the report is a great report, and the reason why I think it's a great report is because it takes us back to where we were at the start of this conversation those years ago, which was actually, it reminds us of the importance of our cities to the future success of the country and to the economy of the UK and the society. And to give you two stats that just highlight this. 2/3 of the tax that is generated in the UK is generated from our urban areas. 2/3 of the tax that is generated in the UK is generated from our urban areas, and 3/4 of the high-skilled jobs, the sorts of jobs that the UK produces and competes globally in, are sited in our urban areas. That just reminds us that when we talk about devolution and all these other issues, we have to go back to where we started in many respects, which is the economic contribution and significance of our urban areas. I think that's a really important point to make. The second point I would make, which is somewhat strange, if we were sitting in some place in the US or we were sitting in some place in Germany, in fact, we would be talking about size, and we would be talking about size mattering. Size, city size in the US and in Germany tells us something about the productivity of that place. It's higher than not. As cities get bigger in Germany and they get bigger in the US, they become more productive. In the UK, that isn't the case. The report makes this point excellently. Size isn't everything in a UK context. Now, we can have a long debate about why that is, and it's not because London's too big, by the way, before anybody jumps down that rabbit hole. So there isn't that relationship, so it allows us to remind ourselves all our cities in different ways are really important. And the third point I'd make very briefly is when you look at the performance of the key cities and medium-sized cities more generally, you see good performance all across the country. This is a distributed pattern of good performance, whether you're in Reading, Brighton, Milton Keynes in the south, whether you're in York or you're in Preston in the north, or if you're in Scotland with Aberdeen, or you're in Cardiff with Wales. This is a distributed good story, and that gives us a real good base, I think, to think about how then we make the most of these places up and down the country. And my final thought would be, it's an interesting one, when we then connect city performance and devolution, we have to ask this question about what is it that we want devolution to be doing for us? Because in a sense, the model we have for devolution in this country is overwhelmingly geographical, it's spatial, we've heard that already, it plays out in different ways. But actually, as Philip was telling us, many of the issues that our cities have in common or are challenged by are not spatial. The supply chain issues and commonalities of our cities across the country is not a spatial issue, it's a sectoral issue. So there's a question there about what is it that we want devolution to respond to. Now, high house prices in Cambridge, high house prices in Bournemouth, they are spatial issues. Devolution can help us deal with that. Boosting the manufacturing industries across our key cities is not necessarily a spatial issue. So again, we have to kind of think about what we want our cities to be doing and the type of support that they particularly need.
Thank you very much.
Can we have a few more questions? So, yeah.
Steve Shostak, I run a regeneration company called Britain's Energy Coast in Cumbria, in West Cumbria. No cities, no conurbations, but exponential economic growth as a result of the nuclear sector, the energy sector. We're talking about trying to accommodate £90 billion worth of growth in the next 40 or 50 years. When I worked in a big city, and another room will be obsessed about Manchester and about Leeds, so was I. And when I worked in a smaller city, Doncaster, some of the ones on your map here, I was obsessed about the small cities. And now I'm working in an area which is predominantly rural, the towns of Whitehaven, Workington, 20, 30,000 people. And you know what? I'm not obsessed about the size of those towns. I've got to grips with the fact that growth is the issue, irrespective of what the geographical format of it all is. Yeah. And it really worries me that if we're not careful, we'll be part of a pecking order for this guy at the end here, who will start with the big cities, maybe then come to you guys in the middle cities, and then John, myself and others will be the also-ran at the bottom, despite the fact that some of us are experiencing exponential economic growth. Our problem in West Cumbria is we don't have enough people to provide the 50 or 60,000 jobs that are going to be needed over the next 20 or 30 years. We have a problem, but the problem is managing growth, not anything else. And I just don't know where we sit in all this any longer, because I worry that when I go back to my politicians in each of the councils, which can't afford to come to conference, by the way, because their budgets are so restricted, I worry what on earth I'm going to advise them to do to make sure they can argue strongly enough to make sure they can win a case for, I would say, West Cumbria, but Cumbria per se. So I worry about the fact that smaller
so small,
are just
you
not
can
in
be
the
even
race.
smaller than the key city.
Indeed,
is the message,
indeed.
Yeah. So,
with growth.
Quite. Chat line.
Hi, Nick Webb from Newport West Conservatives. My question really is to do with overcoming parochialism. A number of the key cities identified also fall into city regions or metro areas. Now, such is the case with Newport, where I'm from, and I have to say I approached the idea of a Cardiff city region very much from the point of view that with care, a successful Cardiff is good news for Newport. Now, the same will apply time and time again, Wolverhampton with Birmingham, Bath with Bristol. I know the West of England very well. And the sort of first part of the question is, how can we get public support to buy into the idea that yes, Bath would gain from working with Bristol, Wolverhampton with Birmingham, and so on? And secondly, how can we also ensure that doesn't dilute the brand at an international level? Now, the partnership that Bath's been involved with for some time has been called the West of England Partnership. On an international scale, that doesn't really register, and in fact they've had to adopt Bristol and Bath internationally and West of England domestically. The combined authority in the West Midlands is to be called the West Midlands because lots of authorities don't want to be called Birmingham, but I suspect when you go to a conference in Davos, Birmingham would mean a lot more than West Midlands.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common issue. So maybe we could address parochialism, and then I'll turn to for closing remarks. Anybody want to?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean, parochialism. Yeah, I mean, just to explain the situation a bit further, we woke up one morning, must have been about 40 odd years ago now. When you went to bed at night, you were in Somerset. When you woke up in the morning, you were in Avon, and nobody liked it. And what we now have is everyone is terrified about A, return to Avon, and B, being taken over by Bristol. And as a politician leading a council, A, I have to say it to my members here first, and I think there'd be a vote of no confidence it was Greater Bristol, and B, the public, which the public is difficult. It's difficult to actually sell. Actually, we still have our own authorities, however, there's this overriding group at the top, and at the moment we call it the Strategic Leaders Board, as you say, of the West of England Partnership, which, where is it? And I get that entirely. So at the moment it's run by those four people, so everybody in Bath, North East Somerset knows that Tim actually, I'll stand up for them. However, if we have the beloved idea of a Metro Mayor, where's he or she come from? If she's from Bristol, no, they don't like us, and that is a difficult point. Does it stop us working together? No, I don't think it does at the moment. So we do have the West of England Partnership, which could possibly be called Greater Bath, but there might be one or two that change.
Deeper Bath.
Deeper Bath.
Deeper Bath, absolutely. or the places around Bath, but we're not that worried about the name. However, it does work at the moment, and it does work well. We're sharing services working. We have quite an ambitious. In fact, it's a shame that Grace got on, because I did want to bring up the Metro Mayor. Whether that's a showstopper or not, I'm hoping it's not, because we do work well. So share services, and we'll increase them with an ambitious bid.
Okay.
Well, just a couple of comments. Just a couple of comments to come back with. And I don't think the Metro Mayor, by the way, is a deal breaker, because everything I've heard from ministers since the general election has said at this smaller level that is not mandatory. It depends how compelling the case is for devolution and how committed you are to delivering it. I think that's the key to the thing. In terms of borders, well, at one level, I don't think any of us should be too concerned about that, nor indeed be too prescriptive about it. Of course, before we combine or do anything with anybody else, yes, we're passionate about the places that we've been elected to represent, and it would be very unlikely that it would be any other way. However, in looking at the devolution agenda and beginning to understand strategically how that's going to work, yes, it has a much larger geography around it, but at the same time, I don't think that that's the end of it, because much of what we do in local government isn't about just what you do within that set area. It is about your relationships with other places. It is about inward investment. It is about getting out there and making sure that economic growth doesn't just stop at your boundary, because that's not how investors and employers actually look at it, is it? Yeah. They look at an area as to whether that's going to fulfil their ambitions, and I think that's probably the focus that we should have.
Right. Thanks very much. I just one remark I would say on the back of Andrew's about the success of these cities. I mean, I often do lists of, I get lists of where's creating jobs and where's, and usually, sadly, places in the north usually come bottom of these lists, and yet the exceptions are always Preston, to some extent York, and usually Warrington, who I see you've not recruited yet, so you have to work on that. So, yeah, and Sunderland does very well as well. Yeah, so it's it is true that there's an outperformance here, and I think the report makes that clear and makes the case. If you can't read the whole document, it is in the Financial Times tomorrow. We're in for a brief of Précy, but it's worth reading the whole document. And I'll just ask Philip to sum up.
Yeah, I'd like to thank once again Key Cities. It's been a pleasure working with you and your officers. And I think really the most fundamental point was the last question in my view that I asked Greg. Because I think that in reality what we have to avoid is getting the smaller deals, and that's really been my issue. What I would say to colleagues and friends in Key Cities is moralities. I think my professional judgment would be, unfortunately they're on demand. I think the areas that might potentially escape it are counties, and I think to the extent, just to advise friends and colleagues, to the extent to which you can make a county case is probably the extent to which you can avoid a metro mayor. But for those situated in clearly core city regions, swallow it, go for the mayor, because the win is enormous. And really, I know it's difficult, but I think that's the political reality of it. That's just my judgment, but it's proved accurate in the past.
Even if it's
Right, can we have to end?
Yeah, can we just thank the panel for their time, because it's been very Yeah.
And I think we got the point over to Greg. Which I was
had the conversation with
But it's just nice to be able to draw on. I mean, I was pleased that we got it out of it. There's no size.
We went to Chiltern. The big issue for Chiltern was the creeping development. So slowly but surely, the designation between Chiltern and Gloucester. And there had to be this sort of gap between the two. There is this patch of land. You will not be allowed to buy dead body.
Did you gentlemen in the crowd yesterday about it?
No, I didn't see him.
He wasn't around.
I didn't see him.
I wasn't embarrassed for that story, but I was talking to a couple of businessmen from Bristol. I won't have to get into trouble. And we started a long discussion about the Metro vehicle fees, including the migration services, and then went through all the next needs. So if you want to cause embarrassment, it might be something to bear in mind when you go to negotiations.
I'm not that keen on being a Metro Mayor.
Mr. Mayor Warwick.
You might not be.
All right, Mr. Mayor will be.
Yeah, I'm actually working on it.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
The big issue is getting the vote out. We've worked hard, we've got a majority now, it's never been very late. So the last time to be honest with you. It's been a good chance. The instability. Absolutely. I think the issue is what's very which I actually think the mayor, he or she would have done for North and Somerset, because Paul and White voters and Big Bar
that's all right. That's been pushed to meet you already.
So I think that's what it is.
I can't see them winning. I mean, it's quite impressive to dog they have. I know they stumbled a little bit.
Well, they did, even though they have a little bit. However, I think it's just quite good to get on with it.
There is a principle, isn't there? You get so close to it as well.
There's a lot of iffy names and numbers on it,
Will people
it's selling it. It's electric.
It's not an easy.
And I think these are all steel. We do actually do quite good negotiations. I didn't bring it up and down. However, the next stage another day, Hear that beer like
we have huge.
Thank you very much, gents.
Well,
for that.
exactly, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Right, nice to meet you. Yeah. Good luck. Yeah. 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 Well, this is one about Metro. No, right. The other point of it is we still have going to have one person.